Before I bring Howard Balzer up, who's seen every coach for the last 45 years in the NFL, our good friend from SiriusXM, before I bring him up here, and also go phnx.com, Talk of Fame Network. He's all over the place. Hall of Fame voter as well. This guy, Mike McDaniel, has his Hello Kitty backpack. He rolls around on skates. He's got a pen that glows in the dark. And this guy is designing plays like I've never seen. Now, I don't know if the Dolphins are real. We're also going to get a little bit of info on Kyler Murray here in a minute. But I want to bring my Hall of Fame voter up here, Howard Balzer, our dear friend, and we appreciate him finding time for us. You had to start your team with two dudes. Between these two guys, Tua or Hurts, who would you start your team with?
Wow, that's a great question. At this point, until I really know that Tua is going to stay healthy, I would probably say Hurts. Obviously, he's got the running ability. He was a little banged up at the end of last season. But I'll tell you, Tua is defying the odds that a lot of people in Miami thought it was a mistake when the Dolphins drafted him as high as they did. And, obviously he's had the concussion issues. You hope for his sake that doesn't continue. But boy, with the players he has around him, and obviously all quarterbacks have to have that. I mean, Hurts last year had the addition of A.J. Brown to go with Devontae Smith and an unbelievable offensive line, and they did what they did. So those are two pretty darn good quarterbacks now. But if you force me, Dan, to pick one, I would probably say Hurts. But boy, Tua's on fire, and that whole team's on fire. It's pretty incredible what they're doing so far this season.
Does Chris Greer give him a $50 million quarterback at the end?
You almost have to. I mean, you almost have to. As long as obviously the health is a big factor, right? But,
short-term deal, maybe?
Well, I don't know.
3 years?
Maybe you have other ways of putting injury protection in there. But the bottom line in this league, as we've seen, is that I know there's always that age-old debate that he's not as good as that guy who got that money and all that. But it really doesn't matter when you get down to it, because when you have the quarterback and you believe he is your guy and can play at a high level and that your team can win with him, then you have to pay the going rate. Because what happens if you let him go? Do you know you're going to get another guy just as good? So, maybe they could get away with doing a shorter term deal. But and a lot of the injury stuff, let's be real, is tied into the guaranteed money. And so maybe you're able to get a deal that doesn't have as much guarantees, and more guarantees are hinged on, remaining healthy. That's a way to structure it if you're still concerned. So, but the guy's just proven that he can play. And when you have that talent like Tyreek Hill and all those guys, but like I say, the debate about it is if you have your guy, you got to pay him. And that's just the way it is in the NFL.
The best team who's put together the best wins in the NFC? Lions, Eagles, 49ers, or Cowboys? If you had to pick between those teams, if you want to throw someone else in there, but of those teams, to me, because I think it's who you play and not your record, Howard, that tells you more about a team if they have a quality win. Like, look at the Jets. The Jets have beat the Bills and the Eagles. They're 3-3. That's pretty damn impressive.
And they almost beat the Chiefs.
Right. I mean, without Aaron Rodgers. That's pretty good stuff going on. So of those NFC teams that I mentioned, who's impressed you the most?
I still believe the 49ers are the most complete team on offense and defense. Certainly the Eagles are not that far behind them. The Lions now, I mean, you look at the Lions, and since that 1-6 start last season, 16 games are 13-3. So this team is, and I remember at that point last year when they were 1-6, there were all those questions. Oh, Aaron Glenn's not the right defensive coordinator. They're not playing good enough defense. Well, they're playing darn good defense now, and it all goes to show that we all, and I say collectively, so many jump on the coordinator when a team isn't playing well, whether it's offense or defense. And most of the time it's traced to the personnel. You know, I'm sure you've heard the famous one that everyone always says. It's not so much about the X's and O's as it is of having the Jimmies and the Joes.
Right.
And you better have those guys. You can have the greatest scheme in the world, but if you don't have players to carry it out and execute it against really good, really good opponents and a very competitive league, then you're not going to have success. And the Lions have been built tremendously. And I'll say this about them, Dan, is that I don't know how many times in the last couple of years after the Matthew Stafford trade, where they sent him to the Rams for Jared Goff, how many times people said to me, or you'd read it, oh, when are the Lions going to move off Jared Goff? When are they going to move off Jared Goff? And I would always give this answer. First of all, he played pretty darn good football with the Rams. They weren't, they did give him that second contract. They gave him that contract extension. They wanted a little better. I mean, they're under a little bit of pressure, obviously, in LA when you're playing in that market, that you've got to win big to have the fans on your side. But the point I've said all along, Dan, on the Lions, that a lot of people don't realize is that their general manager, Brad Holmes, I got to know him when he started his NFL career as a public relations intern with the Rams. He wanted to get into scouting. There were no openings, so he said, well, I'll just work anywhere. And they put him in the PR department, and he helped out. Really sharp guy, good guy. He then got into the scouting department, worked his way up, and guess who was the director of college scouting for the Rams when they drafted Jared Goff? Brad Holmes, who's now the Lions general manager. That's why they wanted him in that trade. Okay, if we're going to trade Matthew Stafford, we got to get a quarterback back. And he had the confidence in him. Obviously, Dan Campbell does, the team does, and he's playing lights out football for that team. So, I'm not saying he's in the class of the greatest of all time, but you can win games with Jared Goff. But I still believe that top to bottom on the roster, the 49ers are the most complete team in the NFC and maybe in the NFL for that matter, but got to stay healthy. I mean, they lost to the Browns last week, obviously, on a missed field goal. They lose Christian McCaffrey. That could be crucial if he misses extended time. I mean, I think they've lost one game since last season, since McCaffrey got there. So, but with him and with Deebo Samuel healthy, that's a really good football team, obviously.
I'll say this to you. I've never seen a deal that was done in the short term that the Rams benefited by winning, obviously, the Super Bowl. But look at all those picks that they got. Penei Sewell was part of that. The running back from Alabama was part of that. Jameson Williams was part of that. Aiden Hutchinson was part of that deal. And you got a quarterback that's turning the Lions around. People don't realize this. Since 1957, they've had 2 playoff wins.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, Howard, it's really benefited both. The micro for the Rams and the macro for the Lions. I mean, you rarely see that where both benefit.
No, you're 100% right. And the one thing I like about him, and you wonder, I always question this in the NFL just generally when it comes to head coaching hiring cycle time in the NFL. And what do the lazy owners do? They hardly ever think outside the box. They look at the good teams and the good coordinators that are on those teams, and those are the guys that become the ones who are interviewed and get most of the jobs. Well, the Lions thought out, they went outside the box when they hired Dan Campbell, just like the Ravens did a long time ago when they hired John Harbaugh, like the Eagles did a longer time ago when they hired Andy Reid. Those guys weren't coordinators, but there was something in them that the teams interviewing them saw that they believe would make good head coaches that leads a team. I think a lot of times, Dan, we always talk about the culture in an organization and how a head coach has to, establish that culture for the players. But you very rarely hear it talked about in the context of that head coach establishing a culture with his assistants and with the coaches on the staff. Because that's for the most part what really drives success in the NFL is the assistant coaching staff. And when you have a coordinator who becomes that head coach, a lot of times they're buried in that side of the ball and they're not even involved in the other side all that much. And it doesn't mean you can't be successful, because many have been. But I think when you have a quote CEO as the head coach who basically just establishes that atmosphere that he wants on that team and just hires a lot of good people under him, that can be very successful too. And I just wish more owners would look, and GMs, whoever's doing the hiring, would look more outside the box than just going with the who happens to be the hot coordinator at the time.
You have seen just about every in the last 40 years greatest players in the history of the game, and I want to say this to you: that guy in Cleveland, Myles Garrett, is such a force. He is a force, and I am sick and tired of this when I hear people tell me that Michael Parsons is Lawrence Taylor. I mean, Howard, guys like you and me, we chuckle like you're chuckling. I mean, in losses that the Giants had, only him and Reggie White, do you ever remember going, I'll tell you what, those teams that they played, they're lucky because I never remember those guys playing bad. I call him missing Parsons sometimes because this guy is missing person. Against the Cardinals, who, by the way, Howard covers the Cardinals, he was destroyed in that game.
He was.
I mean, how shocked were you that the Cardinals ran that Cowboy team over?
I was very surprised. Now, what I saw with that team for the first couple of games is that, I mean, they're very undermanned talent-wise, but it's almost cliche to say, well, they come out and compete and they play hard. Well, that's what guys are supposed to do. But they do that. And they are buying into Jonathan Gannon, the culture he's trying to establish. They just don't have a lot of talent right now. But that game against the Cowboys, they just took it to them. Now, they've been a bad second-half team, and a lot of that is because I think they just get, I don't know if it run down is the fairest way to say it, but the better talent just wins out when you get to the second half. And it almost did that with in that Cowboys game, because the Cowboys had a huge amount of yards in that second half. I tracked it the other day. I think it was something like 263 yards in the second half, but they couldn't score in the red zone. And that's where that game that was lost for the Cowboys, when I think they were in the red zone 4 times in the second half and only had 2 field goals come out of it, including an end zone interception. And so, but yeah, it was surprising that they were able to win that. But, I think, now that Kyler Murray's back practicing, we'll see when he starts playing. I think that will give the team a lift, and they'll surprise some teams in the second half. But the defense, boy, that defense was undermanned and thin before the season even started, and then they lost Budda Baker, who just returned to practice this week, but they lost him after the first game. Now they didn't play with the last game and a half without his safety tandem, Jalen Thompson. Those are the 2 best players on that defense. And they've been without them. But I think if they get those guys back, and the defense starts figuring out how to stop a team in the second half, they could steal some games in the second half of the season, assuming that Murray comes back, stays healthy, and knocks the rust off pretty quickly.
When you look at Jonathan Gannon, have you been surprised by how he's coached? Is he a guy that they like? Do you think that it's working with Jonathan Gannon as the head coach of the Cardinals?
It does appear to be, it does look to be working. Now, granted, all the players speak highly of everything that's being done. And what are they going to say? They're going to tell us the guy sucks? I mean, obviously they're not going to do that, but they all speak in terms of liking the way he has changed the culture, the way he has introduced accountability. He's stressed that, even when we ask him, we talk about, I ask about, he says, hey, obviously you want to win games, but what we're about now is the process of establishing the process of how you get to the point where you can win games. And he has to know deep down they don't have the talent. They have 2 first-year coordinators that are offense and defensive coordinators for the first time in their careers. Talking to them, listening to them, they seem to know what the heck they're doing, but they're not working with a full deck. That's for sure. But it does look like that. This is a team that likes the message that Gannon is spreading and is going out there, just giving everything they have, to try to win games. And heck, they've even the 49ers game, it was 20-16 late in the third quarter. And then they had a tough play happen and a drive stalled. And then the 49ers went down the field and made it a 2-score game, and it was basically over. But they were in that game against a team I was just talking about, I think might be the best in the NFL. So that's the way they've played so far. And I think they're doing the best they probably could with the talent that's on that roster right now.
There's a story coming out by Howard on gophnx.com about Kyler Murray. And you mentioned that he's practicing again. It's quite a gamble here, whether or not you're really deciding whether or not to stick with him, to move on from him, to think he's the future. There's a ton of money still wrapped around him. There's dead money. There's a really big decision to be made here with a brand new coach. It wasn't his selection to have him as the quarterback. Where are they with Kyler Murray and the gamble to play him? I mean, you saw what the Texans did. Even going through all of that, he was active through that whole time, Howard. For every week was Deshaun Watson, but they didn't want to take a shot at putting him in a game. Maybe he gets hurt and it devalues him so that they don't get the commodity and the assets when it comes to draft picks so they can move him like they did to Cleveland. Where do they go with him? And give us a little bit of the insight of what you're going to say about the Murray article.
Well, the situation with Murray, I think, is different than Deshaun for the main reason is Watson wasn't coming off an injury. And also he wanted out from that team. And so they just did what they did for that year. And if we believe everything the team says, then they want Kyler Murray to be their quarterback. Obviously, that can change at any moment. But I don't think it's a gamble to play him because even if in the back of their mind they're saying, well, we could move on from Kyler and get a new quarterback in here. But the only way realistically, Dan, to move on from him is to trade him. To get that, so they won't have if they released him, the dead money would just be outrageous. And so the only way you can trade him is for him to play. And so I think it serves a dual purpose of playing him. And he's done everything asked. He's done everything that he can possibly do to get to this point, to begin practicing. And whether, the mental reps and all that, it is a new offense. So he has to show that, he can run that. But everything they said, he's been there in meetings. He's doing all the things you have to do along those lines. And they refer to him as a franchise quarterback. Now, are they just saying that? You never know. I mean, you always have to take with a grain of salt the things that GMs and coaches, say about guys. Because like I said, it can change the next day. I mean, what the heck? Colt McCoy was going to be their starter for the entire offseason and training camp. And then they cut him after acquiring Joshua Dobbs. And so my point is that to trade him, you have to play him. But if you play him and he does what you believe he's capable of doing, then why move on to someone else? Yeah, you can get another quarterback in the draft and he'll have a lesser contract, but you still never know how a guy's going to come into the NFL and play. And if they're in position to get one of the higher rated quarterbacks and they want to stay with Kyler Murray, then just imagine the draft pick package they could get for trading out of wherever they are for another team that wants a quarterback. So I don't see it as a gamble playing him. I think it's something that it can benefit the Cardinals either way, whether they want to keep him or at some point whether they decide to move on from him.
Do you think that the Cardinals, as we get closer to the October 31st deadline, will move either Zach Ertz or do you think they'll move Budda Baker? Or because Murray's coming back, does that pause that? I mean, where are you with those guys?
Yeah, it's a good question. And, I think Ertz possibly could. I don't know that you would get all that much for him. He hasn't been the same player this year. He came back from an ACL himself, and he hasn't really established a connection yet with Dobbs at quarterback. And I think I put that on Dobbs as much as Ertz, although Ertz has had a couple of drops. But at his age, I'm not sure that what you could get for him. Budda Baker, certainly you could, but I don't think they just want to shed too much from this because I think they see Budda Baker as a guy that they want as a leader and a guy that young players can see, okay, this is the way you're going to get taken care of when it hopefully becomes your time. So the one interesting one, Dan, though, is Hollywood Brown, because he has shown how valuable he is to this team. He should have a lot more yards and catches, but Dobbs has shown various moments of inaccurate throws. He went to college. He was at Oklahoma with Kyler Murray. He's in his last year of his contract at $13.4 million. And so the big debate is, if someone wants to give something for him, then take it, because I don't know if the Cardinals are going to want to commit, let's say, $18 million a year for Hollywood
Is he
Brown.
an $18 million a year guy, you think?
I don't know. I don't think he is. But then again, I didn't think Christian Kirk was either.
Right.
when he signed a contract with the Jaguars. So maybe the Cardinals will think he's worth it, assuming Murray is still there. If you trade him, though, now in the next couple of weeks, then that's going to affect how Kyler Murray plays when he gets out there, because they really won't have a true target for him. They got Michael Wilson's done nice as a rookie, and Rondale Moore can do some things here and there. But to me, you need Brown out there to maximize what Murray is capable of. And then if they show that connection is really good, then who knows? Maybe they'll say, hey, it is worth it to pay Hollywood Brown. Maybe not a 5-year deal, that kind of money, but maybe a 3-year contract. Who knows? I mean, you never know how those things work. But the other part of it is that I don't know what they would get in a trade for him. But if he gets a big contract from somebody next year, then the Cardinals will get a 3rd or 4th round draft pick as a compensatory pick for losing him as a free agent. So I just don't see them being very active now. But again, if some team wanted Zach Ertz, yeah, I could see that happening, because they have some decent depth at that position, and they really like Trey McBride, who was their 2nd round pick last year.
I have to ask you a Hall of Fame question. I'm on these panels. I'm on Jared Bell's panel, Jason Cole, Rick Gosselin. And for those that know that, they asked me an opinion of other guys. I get 15 guys, and they go, who do you think is a Hall of Fame guy? And I'm very honored to have that. And this is what I'm getting back on feedback sometimes, Howard. The guys are now saying that there's too many guys going into the Hall of Fame every year, and you guys are putting too many people in. Do you think that's a fair comment, that there's too many guys that are going in? Because baseball, they have to have that percentage thing. For sometimes nobody goes into the Hall of Fame in baseball. Right. Do you guys think? Do you really have to put a guy in every year to the Hall of Fame?
Well, the Hall of Fame has a minimum.
Oh, okay.
The Hall of Fame has a minimum.
So the Hall of Fame has a minimum of 5 guys?
It's 4.
4?
I believe it's 4. So it doesn't have to be all 5 that make the final vote. The last person, I believe, was Michael Irvin back in around 2007, whenever, I think it was the year before he ended up going in, that he was in the final 5 and didn't get enough votes to be enshrined. And then the next year he came back as a finalist anyway. And so what are you going to do?
Right.
I mean, if you don't put one of the guys in, then they're coming back as a finalist. And what does that do? That keeps somebody else from becoming a finalist and being discussed in our meeting. So I don't think it's an illegitimate comment to say that sometimes it's become the hall of the very, very, very good and not the elite. But the Hall of Fame, that's what they mandate in terms of the numbers who can get in. And I mean, there was a time, I remember the year that Al Davis went in, and there was a lot of mixed opinions about Al Davis. And it wasn't that he hadn't done great things. It was just some people, I think, just voted against him because they didn't like him. Well, the year he got in, and at that time, there was only 4 finalists, and they increased it to 5 at some later date. And and Al Davis got in that year. It was never confirmed, but there was the belief that he might not have gotten that 80% threshold of yes votes from the committee to get in. But if you don't have 4, then they take the next guy that was in that they take, let's say only 2 get it. Well, they're going to take another 2 that have. So who knows? It might be 78%, 75%, whatever it might be. And so the Hall of Fame mandates that. And so we just follow the bylaws. But I don't know, quite honestly, Dan, I don't think there's ever been a real push to make it harder. Make it harder for guys. It's awful hard now, even for those that some would say, well, was he really a Hall of Famer? In my mind, and a lot of the mind is, it's interesting at the meeting when someone like a Peyton Manning comes along, who's ever doing the presentation, stands up and says, I present Peyton Manning for the Pro Football Hall of Fame, and then they sit down and there's no discussion. Those, you could argue, are the true elites of the game. Those are the true Hall of Famers. When you have to debate, you can make an argument, well, are they really in the Hall of Fame? But what should the Hall of Fame be? Should it be for the absolutely, truly elite, the best of the best of the best? Or is it a good thing to honor a lot of the great players who were great players, but maybe just are a notch below some of those others? And so, but a lot of it, let's be honest, it's about putting guys in. It's about having a ceremony and an enshrinement every year, and having a lot of people coming to town and staying in hotels and all those things. And so, and here we are now with a seniors group where we're putting seniors in, some of them who were never even finalists during their modern day eligibility.
Howard, let me stop you on that for a second, because I made this debate with Jason Cole. So I go, doesn't that undermine all of today's present voters, that they would undermine the guys in the 50s, 40s as sports writers who didn't think that those men that were in that era weren't Hall of Famers, to make you change that vote of those writers? I mean, it's really a disgraceful thing to those writers that they saw. You didn't see those guys playing back in them times. Only on film. They were there with those coaches and the players.
But I'm talking about, well, there's two issues here, because there's one with the years past, the 40s and the 50s. Let's remember, the Hall of Fame didn't start until 1963.
Right.
And so you already had 44 seasons of NFL football. And so there's a lot of guys that fall through the cracks that way, which was the Centennial Committee. The 2020 class was designed to go back and put a lot of those guys in that were forgotten. And some believe they didn't get enough of those. But a lot of the seniors I'm talking about, I mean, we're like a guy like Joe Klecko, right? Hell of a player, right? And so, but sometimes, and here's an interesting one. But let's say Joe Klecko is one example. I mean, there's still guys who played in the last 30, 40 years. And, Albert Lewis, who I think was every bit the cornerback, and maybe was better than Rondé Barber.
Gastineau.
Again, there's a lot of, we can make a long, long list. And so, Sam Mills and Leroy Butler, who went in his modern day, Sam Mills went in his final year of eligibility and wasn't even a semifinalist, I don't think, for the first 15 years of his eligibility. And then a little advocacy starts, and people look at the record a little closer. And you have guys that a lot of times when we sit down and vote on 25 semifinalists and 15 finals, a lot of times we're looking at, well, what was last year's group look like, right? And so there's a lot of them who didn't get in. You look at those guys, you vote for them. Maybe there's a few newbies. You have first-time eligibles. And before you know it, a guy who slipped through the cracks slips through for another year. I'll give you a good example. I'm watching a TV show last weekend, right? I think it was after one of the baseball games. And I think it was an old show. And Lomas Brown was being inducted into a Hall of Fame. I don't know if it's a college football Hall of Fame.
Lions.
Whatever, right? And
Lions.
And they put up on the screen, 18 years as a left tackle, blocked for Barry Sanders, 7 Pro Bowls, 1 All-Pro and 4 second-team All-Pros. And my wife says to me, when did he go into the Hall of Fame? And I said, he's never been a semifinalist. How does that happen? How does a guy like, is it because he wasn't on, he had Barry Sanders, but we talked earlier about the Lions, certainly not a very good team, and that wasn't his whole career. But sometimes then the guy doesn't play for 5 years, right? And then they come up and they're on the list of nominees and be like, one was, okay, yeah, good player, but you vote for somebody else. He wasn't Orlando Pace, he wasn't Willie Roaf, he wasn't Jonathan Ogden, he wasn't Walter Jones. But you look at that career and you say, this guy should at least be discussed. But those are the things that happen, which pushes those guys up to the seniors or gets them noticed sometimes when someone advocates for them. And like I said earlier, we on the committee maybe look a little closer at a guy. Last year, I sent a letter to the committee about London Fletcher, who, if you look at his numbers, in 16 seasons, never missed a game. After his rookie season, he missed one start in his entire career. And he started with the Rams when they won the Super Bowl, but he was only there a few years. Then he was with Buffalo and Washington when they weren't very good. But you look at his numbers: tackles, interceptions, fumble recoveries, tackles for loss. He has the numbers that are equal, very close to Ray Lewis and Brian Urlacher. And they both went in their first year of eligibility. So Jarrett Bell, you mentioned, he wrote a little letter to the committee. I hadn't written one about London because I've been so busy with advocating for Torrey Holt and Isaac Bruce and all that. I didn't want to hammer, start talking about another guy. Well, once Jarrett did it, I sent a letter and added some things about London Fletcher. And boom, he became a semifinalist. Now, he didn't become a finalist, but he became a semifinalist. So anyway, now, am I going to say that he was Dick Butkus, or
No.
who unfortunately we lost last year? But again, I'll go back to your original question. Just because you're not the elite of the elite, does that mean that you don't deserve a spot in the Pro Football Hall of Fame?
No, you do.
I kind of believe that those players do, because there's so many and they've meant so much to the history and what it is about this game that we all love so much.
I have a minute, and I'm going to ask you the last one here. Let me throw this at you. Are you going to vote up or down on Eli Manning once his eligibility comes?
Now I'm chuckling again. I've said to people ever since, man, that is going to be one heck of a debate.
117, 117,
I know.
and 1.
Exactly. But two Super Bowls. Well, Jim Plunkett had 2 Super Bowls. Now, I'm not saying Eli Manning had a career.
I get it.
But that, to me, that doesn't automatically put you in the Hall of Fame, because you were the quarterback of 2 Super Bowl winning teams that, let's be totally frank about it, they wouldn't have won. And he made big plays and all that. But if it wasn't for that defense that stopped the Patriots in those 2 Super Bowls, then they wouldn't have had those either. So I think he's a borderline Hall of Famer. I personally, and I think the guy who's going to be even a tougher debate is going to be Phillip Rivers.
Yeah.
Because and it's funny because they were traded for each other after what happened in that, what year was it?
2004.
Yeah. And so if Rivers was with the Giants, would the Giants have maybe been better for a lot of those years? Who knows? We'll never know the answers to those questions. But I see Phillip Rivers as a guy who's just as deserving, maybe more so, than Eli Manning. And I don't know what the debate's going to look like, assuming they become, part of that 15 finalist group.
I love talking to you. Don't forget, you can find his work at gophnx.com. Go Phoenix. Talk of Fame Network, Sirius XM. He does great work. He covers the Cardinals as well. He is a Hall of Fame voter. He is our dear friend, and he's been our friend for a long time. Howard, thank you so much, my friend.
My pleasure. Can I give you one stat real quick before I go?
Please.
Because we opened talking a little bit about Miami. And I was doing a radio interview, in fact, back in my hometown of St. Louis. And we're talking about the Dolphins. And, right now they're averaging the first 6 games almost 500 yards a game, like 498.7. And someone said, well, yeah, but they had 726 against Denver, right? Well, yeah, they did. If you take that game out, the other 5 games are still averaging over 450. I mean, it's incredible. So anyway, the interviewer asked me, well, how do you think that compares to the greatest show on turf? Right? And I said, oh, that's a good question. So I went in and looked it up. As great as the Rams were in 1999, they averaged a little bit over 400 yards a game. Good, but not great. But then I said before I looked it up, but people don't remember this. The first 6 games of the 2000 season after that Super Bowl, they were on a pace to shatter every record that has ever existed on offense. And then Kurt Warner got hurt in the 6th game. And I didn't remember what the numbers were. And so it's interesting, it's 6 games, which is what the Dolphins have played. The Rams in the first 6 games of that 2000 season averaged 509 yards per game.
Wow.
509. And they had, it was just insane. They had games of the ones over 500, 513, 2 of 529, and 614 yards in games that year. And then Trent Green came in when Warner got hurt. They still ended up averaging 442 per game. So I heard Mike McDaniel say, I've never seen anything like this in the
Yeah.
NFL. Well,
when you're 14 years old as the head coach of the Dolphins, you probably haven't.
go look at
Hey,
the tape.
Howard, thank you so much, my friend. We have to roll. Thank you for
Okay.
your time, brother.
My pleasure, man. Take care.
You got it. That is the great Howard Balzer. Want to thank everybody for coming aboard. You were spectacular today, as always. Xander, we thank you. Big Joe, we thank you. Tone, way to keep kicking ass, man. Great segment by you. All the work at JAKIB Sports, you can go there and look at everything. Tonight, hey, real quick, Tone, who do you got? I got the Jags tonight. Who do you got tonight there? I got Jags 24-20 tonight. I got Jags 24-20 tonight. That's where I'll go there. Jags by 6. Got it. We'll see you tomorrow, 2 to 6. We'll also catch you on the flip side.
Yo.
Football and Hooters, the perfect pair.